$200 billion. That's what my last name has turned into. Today, my signature isn't just a brand, it's a massive powerhouse that, over time, absorbed Pixar, Marvel, and the Star Wars universe, dominating every screen you're holding in your hand right now. You see the shining castle, the endless lines at the parks, and you think the magic just happens by chance. But let me tell you the truth that fairy tales leave out. I built this empire with the cold sweat of the fear of losing everything over and over again. I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I was a boy delivering newspapers in the snow at 3 in the morning, who lost the rights to his first successful character and who had to count pennies to eat canned beans while dreaming of something no one else could see. Before I was the genius, I was a joke. I was fired, and they said it was for a lack of imagination. I crashed my first company before I was 22. I went hungry, spent days barely eating, and had to survive in Kansas City owing my very soul. They say it all started with a mouse, but the truth is raw. I didn't build Disney with pixie dust. I built it with obsession, sleepless nights, and a stubbornness to prove that the impossible was just a matter of perspective. My name is Walter Elias Disney, and if you want to know how a poor boy from the Midwest created one of the world's biggest money and culture machines, forget the sugar-coated version. I want to tell you how my life really was, from the first stroke on paper to my last breath, and how this dream machine keeps spinning without me. This is the story of how I turned my nightmares into the whole world's dream. It all started in the cold of Chicago on December 5th, 1901. But my story doesn't belong to the big, noisy city. My soul, the true essence of what you call Disney, was born in a place called Marceline, Missouri. I was only 4 years old when my family moved there. If you close your eyes and imagine Main Street in my parks, with those perfect Victorian facades, the smell of popcorn, and that sense of safety that doesn't seem to exist in the real world anymore, you're imagining Marceline. To me, that was paradise. That's where I held a pencil with purpose for the first time. I remember a neighbor, a retired doctor named Doc Sherwood, who paid me a few cents to draw his horse, Rupert. That moment was electric. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the ability to capture life on paper and see a smile on someone's face. I learned early on that art was a powerful currency, but make no mistake, life wasn't a colorful cartoon. My home was ruled by the iron fist of my father, Elias Disney. He was a difficult man, worn down by life, with his own political ideas, but a dictator inside the house. He believed in hard work, physical discipline, and that leisure was, at best, a waste of time and, at worst, a sin. Religion and severity were our daily bread. I loved my mother, Flora, who was the tenderness that balanced out his harshness, but I grew up afraid of my father's belt. That fear taught me to be fast, to be observant, and above all, it taught me to create worlds in my head where I could escape that reality. The idyllic phase in Marceline ended all too fast. When the farm business failed, my father got sick and told us he had sold everything. We moved to Kansas City, and that's where my childhood truly ended at 9 years old. My father bought a newspaper delivery route for the Kansas City Star. Me and my brother Roy, who was always my protector and my guardian angel, were recruited as unpaid labor. For 6 years, my routine was brutal. I got up at 3:30 in the morning every day, rain or shine or snow. I vividly remember the winters, snow up to my waist, the cold cutting through my skin like a knife. Sometimes I'd be so tired I'd doze off standing up, leaning against a pile of newspapers, or I'd fall asleep at my school desk and wake up to the teacher scolding me. I wasn't a brilliant student, not because I was dumb, but because I was exhausted. I delivered papers in the morning and afternoon, and every cent I earned went straight into my father's pocket. I didn't see a dime. That taught me something I carried for the rest of my life: the ability to endure heavy lifting, a work ethic that was almost superhuman, but it also planted the seed of rebellion. I swore to myself that one day I'd be my own boss and no one would ever control my destiny or my money like that again. When World War I broke out, I saw a way out. I wanted to be part of something bigger. I wanted to see the world, but mostly, I wanted to get out from under my father's roof. I was 16, too young to enlist, so I did what any kid with an imagination would do. I forged my birth date on my ID with a friend's help and joined the Red Cross. I was sent to France right after the armistice. I didn't see bloody combat, but I saw devastation. I drove ambulances and supply trucks, and even there, in the middle of Europe's ruins, art was with me. While others played cards or drank, I drew cartoons on the ambulance canvases and made caricatures to send home. That time in France gave me confidence. I was a kid from the Midwest who had crossed the ocean. I felt like I could do anything. I returned to America in 1919, determined I was going to be an artist. My father, of course, thought the idea was ridiculous. To him, drawing wasn't work, but I was immovable. I got a job at a commercial art studio called Pesman Rubin. It was there, between ads and parts catalogs, that I met a strange, quiet man, but with a talent in his hands like I'd never seen before. Ub Iwerks. Remember that name? Without Iwerks, there would be no Walt Disney. We became friends. He was the technical genius, the lightning-fast artist. I was the visionary, the salesman, the storyteller. When we were fired right after Christmas, we decided it was time to take a risk. We founded our first company, Iwerks Disney Commercial Artists. It didn't last long because I soon got an offer to work at the Kansas City Film Ad Company, where I learned the rudimentary technique of cutout animation and camera tricks. That's when the light bulb went off. I saw those figures moving on the screen and thought, this is it. This is what I want to do. I didn't just want to draw static images, I wanted to bring them to life. I borrowed a camera from work, set up a makeshift studio in the family garage, and started experimenting. Ambition took hold of me. At 20, I convinced local investors to put money into my new idea, the Laugh-O-Gram studio. I felt like the king of the world. I hired a team, including and we started producing modernized fairy tales. We did Puss in Boots, Little Red Riding Hood. The quality was good, better than anything I believed was being done in New York at the time. But I was a terrible businessman. I spent more than I brought in. I wanted quality, I wanted everything to be perfect, but I couldn't manage the cash flow. The end of this first adventure was humiliating. The distributors wouldn't pay, debts piled up, and my team started to leave because I had no way to pay their back wages. I ended up living in the studio office because I didn't have money for my apartment rent. I remember sitting in the office chair in the dark, hearing the mice scurrying through the trash. Ironically, I was feeding one of them, a little mouse that lived in a cage on my desk, and maybe, just maybe, he stayed burned into my subconscious. I reached the point of having no money for food. I went hungry, I went bust, I declared bankruptcy. Laugh-O-Gram closed its doors. I was 21 years old and I was, officially, a failure. The city of Kansas City, which I wanted to conquer, had chewed me up and spat me out. But I had one last card up my sleeve. I had produced a short hybrid film mixing a real girl with cartoons called Alice's Wonderland. It was something new, something fresh. No one in Kansas City cared, but I knew that if I could get it in front of the right people, it could work. I sold my camera, the only thing of value I had left, and bought a one-way train ticket to California. I took almost nothing. My luggage was a cardboard suitcase with a few shirts, drawing supplies, and $40 in my pocket. $40. That was all that stood between my future and total destitution. I stepped onto that train, leaving behind debt and shame. But as I watched the Midwest landscape fade through the window, I didn't feel defeated. I felt a strange and dangerous hope. I was going to Hollywood. I wanted to be a film director, and nothing, not hunger, not bankruptcy, not my father telling me I was worthless, was going to stop me. Hollywood, 1923. I stepped off the train with that smell of orange groves and exhaust fumes, fully believing the red carpet was about to be rolled out. I didn't go there to make cartoons. I wanted to be a real film director of movies with real actors. I knocked on every studio door, Universal, MGM, Paramount. I walked into offices, showed my samples, spoke with passion, and the answer was always the same, a polite no or a door in my face. Nobody wanted a kid from Missouri with no experience. The $40 ran out fast. I lived in a rented room and ate as little as possible. The only person I had in the world was my brother, Roy. He was recovering from tuberculosis in a veterans hospital in Los Angeles. Roy wasn't a dreamer like me. He was practical, money-conscious, cautious. But he loved me. When I told him we needed to start a business, he hesitated, but pulled $85 out of his pocket. I added the little I had left. With that measly amount, we founded the Disney Brothers studio in the back of a real estate office belonging to our uncle, Robert Disney. We paid $5 in rent. Salvation came from where I least expected it, from the failure in Kansas City. That little hybrid film, Alice's Wonderland, which mixed a real girl in an animated world, caught the eye of a New York distributor, Margaret Winkler. She liked it. She wanted a whole series. Suddenly, I wasn't a frustrated film director. I was an animation producer with a contract. We needed a team. I convinced the family of the girl who played Alice to move to Hollywood. And more importantly, I wrote desperate letters to my old friend Iwerks, begging him to come. Drop everything. We're in the game. And he came. Without him, I was just a salesman of ideas. With him, I had the fastest hand in the West. It was during this time of frantic work, pulling all-nighters to deliver the film reels, that I met a young woman named Lillian Bounds. She worked in our ink and paint department. To be honest, she wasn't the best painter in the world, but there was something about her, a patience, a sweetness that disarmed me. I offered her rides home in my old truck just to spend more time with her. We got married in 1925. Lillian was my anchor. While I lived with my head in the clouds and my stomach churning with anxiety, she kept my feet on the ground. But the success of the Alice comedies started to fade. The audience wanted something new. Margaret Winkler's husband, a man named Charles Mintz, took over distribution. He was shrewd, cold, and wanted an animal character to compete with Felix the cat. cat. Ub and I created a rabbit. We wanted something different from cats. We called him Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. Oswald was a smash hit. Universal Pictures bought the idea. Real money started coming in for the first time. I bought a new car. We moved to a bigger studio. I felt invincible. I was 26, married, had an expanding studio and the hottest character of the moment. In February 1928, I traveled to New York with Lillian to renegotiate our contract with Charles Mintz. I was going to ask for a budget increase. I felt I deserved it. I walked into his office with a smile, ready to shake hands. What happened in that room was the hardest blow of my professional life. Mintz didn't just deny the raise, he told me with a cynical grin that he was going to cut my pay. And when I threatened to leave and take Oswald with me, he played the card that destroyed me. Walt, didn't you read the fine print? Universal owns Oswald, not you. And by the way, I've already hired most of your animators. They work for me now. I looked around and realized I had been betrayed by my own team. They had made a deal behind my back. I lost everything. My character, my crew, my income. I walked out of that office in a state of shock. Mintz gave me an ultimatum: accept the crumbs or get out of the business. I told him he could keep the rabbit, and I walked out. The trip back to California lasted 3 days. 3 days on a train, crossing the country, brooding over the betrayal. I was humiliated. I had to go back to Los Angeles and tell Roy we lost our biggest asset. Tell Lillian the future was uncertain. I couldn't sleep. The rhythmic sound of the wheels on the tracks seemed to mock me. Lost it. Lost it. Lost it. I needed something. I needed a new character before I reached the station or I'd be finished. I grabbed my notepad. It couldn't be a rabbit. There were already cats everywhere. I thought about dogs, bears, and then I remembered that mouse on my desk in Kansas City. Mice were usually the villains, the dirty pests. But what if it was a friendly mouse? A David versus Goliath? I started sketching some round ears, a simple body. I showed the drawing to Lillian on the train. What do you think? I'm going to call him Mortimer Mouse. She made a face. Mortimer. It's too pompous, Walt, too heavy. How about Mickey? Mickey sounds friendlier. And so, on a train crossing the Midwest, born out of desperation and named by my wife, Mickey Mouse was born. I got to Los Angeles and in secret gathered the few loyalists left, mostly Ub and Roy. Ib drew Mickey at a superhuman speed, hundreds of drawings a day, locked in a room so no one connected to Mintz would see. We made 2 shorts, Plain Crazy and The Galloping Gaucho, but nobody wanted to buy them. Distributors said, "It's just another animal cartoon, Walt. We've seen this." I was on the brink of bankruptcy again. Mickey seemed destined to die in a drawer. That's when fate intervened. In 1927, The Jazz Singer premiered, the first successful film with synchronized sound. The world went crazy. I saw it and thought, with terrifying clarity, silent film was dying. If I wanted to save Mickey, he needed to make some noise. We decided to make a 3rd short, Steamboat Willie, but this time with synchronized sound, music, sound effects, everything hitting the action perfectly. Nobody had done this right in animation. It was expensive. Roy almost had a heart attack when he saw the costs. I had to sell my new car to fund the soundtrack recording in New York. The recording session was a mess. The orchestra couldn't keep up with the timing of the cartoon. I was breaking out in a cold sweat. I had the idea to use a bouncing ball to mark the beat. It worked. When I heard Turkey in the Straw coming out of the speakers in perfect sync with Mickey pulling the cat's tail, I cried. I knew I had gold in my hands. The premiere was at the Colony Theatre in New York on November 18, 1928. Steamboat Willie played before the main feature. I stayed at the back of the room, hiding, watching the audience. When Mickey started playing music using the animals on the boat as instruments, something magical happened. The audience didn't just laugh, they howled, they cheered. They screamed for the projectionist to play it again. No one cared about the main movie. They wanted the mouse. That night, I stopped being a broke producer. Mickey Mouse exploded into pop culture. Within months, he was more famous than many Hollywood stars. The money started coming in, no longer as a trickle, but as a flood. But with success came a new obsession. I would never let anyone own what I created again. Mickey was mine, and I was going to use him to build something that Charles Mintz could never steal. I had won the first battle, but the war was just beginning. I didn't want to just make funny shorts. I wanted to elevate animation to the level of art. I wanted to do the impossible, and the next decade would be the riskiest, most creative, and most dangerous of my life. Mickey Mouse gave me the world, but I soon realized the golden trap. The studio couldn't depend on just one perfect hero. We needed a whole family of characters, capable of doing what he no longer could without tarnishing his image. That's when the universe expanded. We brought in Pluto, who was pure instinct and canine loyalty without saying a word. Then came Goofy. At first, Dippy Dog. He was that silly optimism that always ends in disaster. But the missing piece, my true release valve, arrived in 1934, Donald Duck. Donald was everything Mickey couldn't be anymore. He was grumpy, jealous, explosive, and had a terrible temper. I loved it. His voice, created by Clarence Nash, sounded like someone trying to speak angrily underwater. The audience loved it. With this team, Mickey, Donald, Goofy, and Pluto, I had a perfect base for any kind of story. Money was pouring in from the shorts and merchandising. Watches, dolls, notebooks. Mickey's face was on everything. Roy handled the finances and tried to slow me down, but I was restless. I looked at the 7-minute shorts and felt it wasn't enough. I wanted art. I wanted depth. I created the Silly Symphonies series to experiment. That's where we tested the impossible. When I saw the 3-color Technicolor technology, I felt the future. I dropped half of a film that was already being made in black and white, flowers and trees, and redid everything in color. Roy thought I was crazy, spending money like that. But when the film won the first Oscar for animated short, everyone understood. Color wasn't a luxury, it was the language of emotion. But I had a secret, a plan I'd kept in my head since I was a kid, since I saw in a theater how a story could hypnotize an entire room. I wanted to make a feature-length animated film, and I knew which fairy tale I wanted to adapt: Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. When I announced this idea to the team, there was silence. Then came the laughs and the rumors spreading through Hollywood. They called the project Disney's Folly. The industry's logic was clear. Nobody would pay to sit in a theater for 80 minutes watching cartoons. People would walk out with a headache. They said the bright colors would hurt their eyes. Even my wife Lillian and my brother Roy tried to talk me out of it. "Walt, this is going to break us," Roy would say night after night. But I saw the whole film in my mind. One night, I gathered my animators in the dark studio, paid for their dinner, and alone on the stage, I acted out the entire movie. I did the witch's voice, Snow White's voice, the dwarfs. I sweated, I jumped, I cried. When I finished, I saw it in their eyes. They believed. Production was a 3-year hell. The initial $50,000 budget exploded to $1.5 million. I had to mortgage my house. Roy had to juggle the banks, which threatened to turn off the tap every single month. I wanted perfection. We created the multiplane camera to give the backgrounds depth. We brought in art professors to teach anatomy. Every strand of hair, every movement of the dress had to be real. I didn't want the audience to laugh at the dwarfs. I wanted the audience to cry for the princess's fate. December 21st, 1937. The premiere at the Carthay Circle Theatre. The cream of Hollywood was there. Clark Gable, Marlene Dietrich, Chaplin. I was a nervous wreck backstage. When the film started, I heard the laughter at all the right times, but the real test came during the funeral scene. When the dwarfs wept around the glass coffin, the theater went deathly silent, and then I heard it. The sound of noses being blown. I looked at the audience and saw movie stars wiping away tears. Drawings made of pencil and ink had broken the reality barrier. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was a colossal success. For a while, it was the highest-grossing film in cinema history until it was overtaken by Gone with the Wind. With the money, I paid off debts, gave bonuses to the crew, and built the studio of my dreams in Burbank, a campus that looked like a university, with air conditioning, lawns, and the best technology in the world. I felt like I had reached paradise. We started producing Pinocchio, Fantasia, and Bambi almost at the same time. Pinocchio was technical perfection. Fantasia was my attempt to merge animation with high culture and classical music. I was at the peak of my artistic arrogance. But the real world has a habit of invading fantasy. In 1939, war broke out in Europe. Our foreign markets closed overnight. Pinocchio and Fantasia, despite being masterpieces, were financial failures at the time. The money stopped coming in. The banks started pushing again, and inside my perfect studio in Burbank, the mood soured. I always saw myself as a benevolent father to my artists. I believed we were one big family. I threw parties, picnics. But the studio grew too large. I no longer knew everyone's name. There was pay inequality. The elite animators were making great money, but the in-betweeners and the paint staff were earning very little, and unions were spreading across Hollywood. In 1941, what I consider the greatest personal wound of my career happened: the animators' strike. I arrived at the studio one morning and saw half of my team, people I had trained, people I had shared coffee with, holding picket signs at the door, shouting against me. They called me an exploiter. It cut me deep. I didn't understand. I took it personally. I felt I had given them everything, built that palace for them to work in, and this was their gratitude. The strike lasted months. It was bitter. It destroyed decades-long friendships. I became paranoid, convinced it was the work of communist agitators trying to destroy Hollywood. That dreamer boy from Marceline died a little more. I became harder, more conservative, more suspicious. Father Walt gave way to Boss Disney. To make matters worse, the United States entered World War II after Pearl Harbor. The army took over my studio, literally. Soldiers slept in the hallways where we used to draw fairies. We were forced to make military training films and war propaganda. Donald Duck, my release valve, now appeared in shorts, teaching people how to pay taxes and fight Hitler. The magic had been suspended. The golden age ended with tanks on the studio lawn and resentment in the hallways. I was exhausted, disillusioned with animation, and buried in debt once again. The 40s were an artistically lost decade. We survived by making package films, stitching together cheaper musical shorts just to keep the lights on. Many said the best of Disney was behind us, that I was a man of the past, but they didn't know that, in my restless mind, I was no longer interested only in movies. I was starting to look at something off-screen. I began observing dirty amusement parks with broken rides and rude employees where I took my daughters on weekends. And a question started pounding in my head. Why isn't there a place where parents and children can have fun together in a clean, safe, and magical environment? I was about to bet everything again, and this time, the bet wouldn't be on celluloid, but on concrete and steel. The end of the war brought peace, but it didn't bring the money back immediately. By the late 40s, Disney was up to its neck in debt. The bank was nervous. Roy was nervous. And me? I was bored. It sounds crazy to say, but animation no longer challenged me as it used to. I felt I had already proven what I needed to prove, but we had to save the company. We needed an undeniable hit, something that would bring the audience back with the same force as Snow White. We went back to the classic fairy tales. We bet everything we had left on a story about a mistreated girl and a glass slipper. Cinderella, released in 1950, was our rescue. The film was a hit. Money poured back in, debts were paid, and the studio breathed again. But instead of feeling relief, I felt a growing restlessness. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life just making cartoons. I started escaping the studio. I needed something tangible, something I could touch, control, build with my own hands. Doctors told me I needed a hobby, or my heart wouldn't handle the stress. I remembered my childhood, that time in Marceline, and my fascination with trains. If I couldn't control the world, I would control the tracks. I bought a large plot of land in the Holmby Hills neighborhood and started building a miniature railroad in my backyard. It wasn't a store-bought toy, it was a real steam engine, built on a 1:8 scale big enough for me to sit on and drive. I called it the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad. I'd put on an engineer's jumpsuit, fill the boiler with coal, and spend hours whistling and riding the tracks between my flower beds. My Hollywood friends would come over for dinner, and I'd force them to take a ride on my train. My wife, Lillian, thought it was eccentric, but tolerated it, as long as I didn't destroy her gardens. But that backyard train planted a dangerous seed. I started thinking, what if I could build this on a larger scale? What if I could create a place where people actually entered my movies instead of just watching them? The idea for Disneyland was born out of a moment of parental boredom. On weekends, I took my two daughters, Diane and Sharon, to amusement parks in Los Angeles. While they rode the merry-go-round, I sat on the bench, eating peanuts, just watching. What I saw displeased me. The places were filthy. The employees were rude, often shady-looking. There was trash on the ground. It wasn't a place for the family. It was a place for kids to play while parents stayed bored and worried about safety. I started dreaming of a different place, a clean place, a place where parents and children could have fun together, a place organized like a movie, where every detail tells a story. When I told Roy the idea, he nearly had a stroke. Walt, for God's sake, amusement parks are dirty places. That's a business for con artists. We make movies. This will destroy the trust in the company. The bankers were even worse. They laughed in my face. Why would anyone travel all the way to Anaheim in the middle of orange groves to ride a carousel they can find at the park around the corner? Nobody believed. Nobody wanted to finance it. I was alone again, just like in the Mickey Mouse days. But the obsession had taken hold. I cashed out my life insurance. I sold my vacation home in Palm Springs. I took money out of my own pocket to create a separate company, WED Enterprises, to design the park, because the Disney Productions Board refused to get involved. I gathered my best artists and said, "You aren't drawing for the screen anymore. You're drawing for the real world." We invented a new profession right then and there. Imagineers, engineers of the imagination. To get the missing money, and a lot was missing, about $17 million, I made a deal with the devil according to the film executives of the time. I turned to television. In the 50s, Hollywood hated TV. They saw that little box in the living room as the enemy stealing the cinema audience. But I saw it as an opportunity. The ABC network was desperate for content. I made a proposal. I'll make a weekly show for you, show my cartoons, promote my movies, but in exchange, you finance my park. It was a masterstroke. The Disneyland show premiered in 1954. I hosted it myself. I walked into people's living rooms every week, showed the progress of the park's construction, and explained the concept of the lands: Frontierland, Adventureland, Fantasyland, Tomorrowland. The audience was mesmerized. And as a bonus, we launched a mini-series about a folk hero named Davy Crockett. It was madness. Suddenly, every kid in America wanted a coonskin cap. We sold millions. The hat money financed the castle's concrete. Construction was a race against time. 1 year and 1 day to turn orange groves into magic. I was on the construction site every day, shouting, pointing, changing things at the last minute. This lake is too small. Move that tree 2 feet to the right. The castle's perspective has to make it look bigger. I wanted everything to be perfect. Opening day, July 17th, 1955, went down in history as Black Sunday. It was a total disaster. We invited 11,000 people, but nearly 30,000 showed up, many with counterfeit tickets, jumping over the walls. Traffic was backed up for miles. It was hellish hot. The asphalt on Main Street had been poured the night before and was still soft. Women's high heels sank and got stuck. The plumbers went on strike the last week, and I had to choose between having drinking fountains or working toilets. I yelled, "People can drink Coke and Pepsi, but they need to pee. Make the bathrooms work." Of course, the next day, the papers said I forced people to buy soda. We ran out of food. We ran out of drinks. A gas leak closed Fantasyland temporarily. It was a mess broadcast live to millions on TV. I didn't see it all that day because I was running through the park trying to put out metaphorical fires. But when the dust settled, I felt like we had failed. I thought the press would destroy us, but something curious happened. Despite the heat, despite the lines, despite the soft asphalt, people loved it. They had never seen anything like it. It wasn't a dirty amusement park with crude attractions. It was a movie set where they were the stars. It was clean, it was beautiful, it was safe. Disneyland became an overnight success. Before long, we were drawing crowds, and in the first year, there were millions of visitors. Kings, queens, presidents. Everyone wanted to see my Magic Kingdom. The park changed the financial structure of the company. Now, we no longer depended solely on movie box offices. The park was a constant money machine, come rain or shine. I proved them wrong, again. But I couldn't rest. Disneyland would never be finished, I'd say, as long as there is imagination left in the world. I spent many nights at the park, sometimes sleeping in a small apartment I built above the fire station on Main Street. I watched the crowds from the window, seeing what worked and what didn't. I walked through the park in disguise, counting the steps between trash cans to make sure nobody threw paper on the ground out of laziness. The company was now a multimedia giant. Film, television, music, parks, products. We created a modern model of synergy. But as the 60s approached and my hair turned grayer, and my smoker's cough worsened, I began to feel that Disneyland wasn't enough. The park was surrounded by the city, by cheap motels and ugly neon signs that ruined the illusion. I wanted more space. I wanted to control the entire environment. I wanted to build a real city, a city of the future. I was on top of the world, the most awarded man in Hollywood, the nation's Uncle Walt. But my biggest and strangest vision was yet to come, and time. Time was starting to run out. The 60s passed like a lightning bolt. I was already in my 60s, grey-haired, with that mustache that had become my trademark, coughing more and more because of the cigarettes I smoked non-stop. But my mind was faster than when I was 20. In 1964, we launched what I considered the crown jewel of my film career, Mary Poppins. It was the culmination of everything I'd learned in 40 years. It had animation, it had real actors, special effects that no one could explain, and songs that stuck to your soul. I tried to buy the rights to that book for 20 years. The author, P.L. Travers, was one of the most difficult people I ever negotiated with. She hated the idea of animation, hated the songs, hated almost everything. But I persisted, and when I saw Julie Andrews on screen, floating with Jew umbrella, I felt I had made it. On Oscar night, when we took home 5 statues and were nominated for 13, I looked at Roy and smiled. We won the Hollywood game. No one could say we were just mousetraws anymore. But while the world cheered for Mary Poppins, my head was thousands of miles away on the East Coast. Disneyland in California was a success, but also a frustration. I made a strategic mistake. I bought too little land. As soon as the park opened, hotels, ugly diners, and neon signs surrounded my Magic Kingdom. They were parasites on my success and ruined the vision. I looked outside the park and saw ugly reality invading the fantasy. I swore I'd never let that happen again. I wanted control, total control. I didn't just want a theme park, I wanted to build a world. We began a secret land buying operation. I used shell companies with generic names to buy land in Central Florida. Why Florida? Because it had good weather, space, and cheap land. We bought swamps, orange groves, and scrubland. Nobody knew who was buying. Local newspapers speculated, was it Ford, Boeing, NASA? By the time the truth leaked out, we had already bought a massive area, tens of thousands of acres, and most importantly, we secured a special district that gave us the autonomy to plan infrastructure, services, and local rules within that area. I was setting up my own fiefdom. The world thought I was going to build just another Disneyland. Yes, Roy wanted that. The shareholders wanted that. Build the castle, put Mickey in there, and let's profit. But I had a much more radical idea. First, I called it Project X. Then I gave it a name, EPCOT. experimental prototype community of tomorrow. People today think EPCOT is a park with a giant ball at the entrance, but my dream wasn't a park. It was a real city, a functional utopia. I wanted to create a community where thousands of people would live and work. I wanted to plan housing, work, leisure, all integrated. Transportation would be designed for the future. Monorails, people movers, and cars separated from pedestrians without that mess that swallows cities. Technology would be tested there before going to the rest of the world. I wanted to tackle urban problems, traffic, dirt, lack of organization. I wanted to leave a legacy that proved engineering and imagination could build a possible paradise. I was obsessed. I recorded a film presenting the project to American industry, asking for partnerships. I was tired, thin, with body aches I attributed to old injuries, but the passion in my eyes was the same as the boy who drew horses in Marceline. In November 1966, I finally agreed to look into those pains and that worsening cough. I told my secretary, "Don't worry, I'll be back in 2 weeks to finish planning EPCOT." I never went back. The doctors gave me a hard diagnosis, cancer. I had just turned 65. I went back to the studio only once after that. I tidied up my desk, looked at the models for the Florida project. I knew. I felt that my time was up, but I couldn't stop. I was admitted to St. Joseph's Hospital, which ironically was right across the street from my studio. From my room window, I could see the animation building, the water tower with Mickey painted on it. On my last night, Roy was with me. He, who had always been a rock, the man who held the purse strings while I dreamed, was crying. I was weak, I could barely speak, but my mind was still in Florida. I asked him to look at the ceiling. I started to draw EPCOT on the acoustic ceiling tiles using my imagination. "Roy, look here," I whispered. "This is where the business center goes. The monorail passes through here, connecting the residential area. The lake is there, and the hotels have a view of the lake. Don't let them build ugly hotels. It has to be magical, Roy." I made Roy promise that he would finish it, that he would build Disney World, that he would make the dream happen. On the morning of December 15th, 1966, at 9:30, I passed away. The world stopped. The flags at Disneyland and in Burbank were flown at half-staff. The newspapers reported that the world had become poorer, sadder. But I didn't see the end as a tragedy. I left an empire. I left characters who would be loved by the grandchildren of my generation. But the final irony, my biggest dream, the city of EPCOT, the utopian community where people would live the future, that dream died with me in that hospital room. Roy built the Magic Kingdom. He finished the park. But the living city I imagined was too radical, too risky for anyone else to build. I was a man of contradictions, a relentless dreamer and a demanding boss, a loving father and an absent workaholic, an optimist who sold happiness but lived in worry. But I proved one thing: if you can dream it, you can do it. I turned a mouse into an empire. I turned swamps into magic. And even after my heart stopped beating, the machine I built didn't stop. In fact, it was only just beginning to grow. My heart stopped that December morning, but the promise my brother made at my deathbed lived on. Roy Disney, the man who always preferred to stay in the shadows, postponed his retirement. He led the construction in Florida with a ferocity no one knew he had, and he made one crucial change to the project. At the presentation in October 1971, he stood before the cameras and declared that the complex would not be called just Disney World, but rather Walt Disney World. He said, "So that everyone knows this was the dream of just one man." Roy died 2 months later. He fulfilled his mission and left to join me. Without the two of us, the company entered a fog. For nearly 15 years, the executives who remained were paralyzed. They looked at every decision and asked, what would Walt do? That is the worst thing you can do in business. The world changes. I changed all the time. Trying to imitate the past almost bankrupted the company. In the 80s, the studio became a target. Wall Street bankers wanted to buy Disney, tear it apart, and sell the pieces. The film studio to one, the park to another. The dream was millimeters away from being dismantled, but magic has a funny way of surviving. New leadership took over in 1984, Michael Eisner and Frank Wells. They understood that honoring my legacy wasn't about copying what I did, but about having the courage to innovate as I had. They brought the Renaissance era, The Little Mermaid, Beauty, and the Beast, The Lion King. Suddenly, animation wasn't kids' stuff. It was major, prestigious cinema. The music returned, Broadway came along, and the parks multiplied in Tokyo, Paris, Hong Kong. The Disney brand stopped being just nostalgic and became relevant again. And then came the new millennium and the era of aggressive expansion under Bob Iger. I started by drawing a mouse. They started buying universes. I've watched from where I am my company buy Pixar, those digital geniuses who, under the guidance of Steve Jobs and John Lasseter, reinvented the animation I loved so much. I watched Disney buy Marvel, Captain America, and Iron Man, now live under the same roof as Mickey. Then came Lucasfilm. The Star Wars universe, George Lucas's cultural force, is now ours. And finally, Fox. Today, the Walt Disney Company isn't just a studio, it's a media juggernaut. Streaming, sports channels, cruise ships, private islands, luxury resorts. It's a money-making machine that operates 24 hours a day across every time zone on Earth. Do I like everything I see? Honestly, not everything. Sometimes I feel the corporation has grown too big, too impersonal. EPCOT became a theme park, not the utopian city I dreamed of. Ticket prices have risen so much that I wonder if a working-class father, like my father Elias, could take his kids today. There's a danger that the magic becomes just a product calculated on Excel spreadsheets. But then I look at the face of a 4-year-old child arriving at the Magic Kingdom for the first time. I see their eyes light up when they see the castle. I see a family crying together while watching a Pixar movie. I see that despite the billion-dollar mergers, the stocks, and the marketing strategies, the heart of the thing still beats. The lesson of my life isn't about how to draw mice or build roller coasters. The lesson is about resilience. It's about the ability to hear no 1,000 times and keep walking. It's about going broke, going hungry, being betrayed, and using that pain as fuel to create something beautiful. I was an imperfect man. I was stubborn. I was a smoker. I was a micromanager. But I left the world a powerful tool: optimism. I taught generations to believe that no matter how dark reality seems, if you have the courage to dream and the discipline to work, your heart's desires can indeed come true. The empire is giant today, but always remember, all of this, every park, every movie, every toy, only exists because I was brave enough to start. I am Walt Disney, and this was my story. Now a question back to you. Did you know about the failures, the debts, and the betrayals behind the Disney castle? It's easy to look at ready-made success and forget the blood that was shed at the foundation. If this story touched you, if you learned something new about how persistence can change the world, I have a quick request. Leave a like on this video right now. That helps this story reach more dreamers out there. And if you're not part of our community yet, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. We bring stories of empires and legends every week, and you won't want to miss the next one. Speaking of legends, if you enjoyed learning how Disney was built, you need to watch the video appearing on the screen right now. Click there and we'll see you in the next story. Take care.